At the beginning of the film, our main character wakes up in a small house and is being taken care of by a nearby girl. She introduces herself as Iruru and explains that she was the one who saved him and brought him back to care for him. However, he cannot remember who he is or why there is a mask on his face. The next morning, when he wakes up, he realizes that indeed, no matter what he does, the mask cannot be removed. Iruru's grandmother then comes to check on him and asks if he feels any better. She also does not know who he is, and as for the reason why the mask cannot be removed, she says there must be some explanation for it. She advises him not to think too much for now and to focus on resting and recovering. Later, Iruru brings him some porridge to help him regain his strength. The man thanks her family for their kindness. He then notices someone secretly watching him from behind. Iruru's grandmother brings him some clothes that belong to her son for him to wear. When he wants to go out for a walk, the grandmother tells Iruru to go with him, just in case he faints again outside so that someone can bring him back. The peeking eyes appear again, and Iruru introduces the person to him. It's her younger sister, Iruru. Iruru finds the man a bit strange because he's wearing their father's clothes. Their father had passed away, and their mother also died after giving birth to Iruru. The man feels a little awkward wearing something so important, but Iruru doesn't mind much. While they are walking, the man still feels uncomfortable being supported by Iruru like that. But she says that country girls like her are very strong, so he doesn't need to worry. He then notices Iruru's tail and touches it out of curiosity, but she immediately pushes him down, proving she was right about being strong. Right after that, a man named Tioro comes over to help him up. Tioro recognizes him as the strange man who was brought to the village chief's house. This place has been a refuge for quite a few people because it's peaceful. It's also quite small, and everyone lives happily together. Currently, some houses need repairing after a recent earthquake. The man seems to recall something for a moment, but then brushes it aside. Soon after, Tioro's wife, Sopo, comes looking for her husband, thinking he's just being lazy and skipping work, so she grabs his ear and drags him back. She also notices that Iruru seems to have found someone she likes, but Iruru insists that Sopo is misunderstanding, as she's only helping a sick man. The two then continue walking around the village. The man sees the peaceful scenery of the place and finds it pleasant, as well as Iruru herself. While they rest under a tree, Iruru apologizes for dragging him around so much. But since he was the one who wanted to go out for a walk, she doesn't need to feel guilty. Iruru wants him to rest a little longer before they head back, but then she hears noises coming from the village, so she tells him to stay there and rest while she checks it out. When she returns to the village, she sees her old friend Nuwangi, who now works for the government and has come to collect taxes. Nuwangi grew up in the same village, but now that he has power, he ruthlessly exploits it, demanding taxes and claiming that as long as the village pays, the authorities will protect them from war. Nuwangi has also liked Iruru for a long time and wants to take her with him, but she refuses, saying she doesn't need wealth or luxury. The main character then arrives and tells Nuwangi to stop, but Nuwangi arrogantly declares that he's a relative of the local lord and that a freak like him has no right to interfere. Iruru steps in to stop the two of them and asks Nuwangi to let it go. But when he learns that Iruru and the man are living together, he becomes furious, accusing the man of being a third party who's interfering between him and Iruru. When Iruru explains the situation, Nuwangi calms down a bit, but then the man provokes him, causing Nuwangi to lose his temper and start a fight. However, the man is not someone who can be easily bullied. Furious, Nuwangi leaves. Later that afternoon, when they return home, Iruru tells the man that Nuwangi wasn't always like this, but the man says that when people are young, they haven't yet learned greed. As for Nuwangi, when he returns, he vents his anger on a sacred statue nearby. The birds around suddenly fly away, and his mount becomes terrified by a strange, frightening sound and runs off. At this moment, Iruru's grandmother also hears the sound coming from the forest and calls the entire village to gather. She suspects that someone has desecrated the forest and knocked over the statue. The villagers look toward the main character, but Iruru testifies for him because she had been with him all day. When Iruru wakes up, Iruru has to take her sister back to their room so the others can continue discussing. The main character understands why he is being suspected. He then asks the village elder about the spirit of the forest, and she explains that it is a divine beast that protects the forest from divine punishment. They are obliged to do something to appease the beast's anger, otherwise they will no longer be able to enter the forest. Someone suggests that they capture the beast, but the elder says it is extremely powerful and intelligent, and confronting it will only bring casualties. A villager then returns to report that the statue has indeed been toppled. They cannot rebuild it now because it is raining heavily. The main character has a feeling that the gods would not be angered by something so trivial, though he does not know why he feels this way. The elder, however, instructs everyone to stay inside at night and avoid going out. When he returns to his room, Iruru replaces the bandages on him. He suddenly experiences a headache and sees strange fragments of memories, but Iruru tells him to stay calm because sooner or later his memories will return. The next morning, the main character joins Iruru's grandmother, Iruru, and a group of men from the village to go see the statue's condition. Indeed, the statue has been completely destroyed, and their only option is to build a new one. Some begin to feel scared and want to leave, because not long ago, a neighboring village was attacked by a ferocious creature. The elder says the divine beast only acts at night, so they should be safe to rebuild during the day, but must also avoid making too much noise to prevent waking it. They then rebuild a new statue and hope it will calm the beast's anger at least a little. As they prepare to leave, the main character notices some tufts of fur nearby. When they return to the village, it is already near dusk. The elder advises the men to return home to their wives and children early. Tioro also asks the main character to look after Iruru's family. They then notice that Iruru is also hiding nearby and seems to dislike the main character. Tioro tells him not to pay too much attention to it. Suddenly, a sound from the forest echoes again, so everyone returns home and bolts the doors. Yet at night, the forest's divine beast still comes for them. The main character hears screams outside and wants to do something, but the elder tells him that if he goes out now, it will only cause more casualties because humans cannot fight such a powerful beast. Long ago, the elder's sister had offered herself as a sacrifice to the beast so that it would sleep for so long. But just then, the outside suddenly grows silent, prompting the main character to go see what's happening. He steps outside and sees the beast attacking a villager's house and devouring someone inside. It suddenly lunges at him, forcing him to grab a nearby farming tool to defend himself, but its body is far too tough to pierce. It then strikes and hurls him away. Iruru rushes out to protect him, but at that moment the beast stops, and when the rain starts falling, it runs off. Back at the elder's house, the entire village grieves the loss of a family. However, the main character tells them he has found a way to fight back. He had picked up some of the beast's fur near the statue and put it into water, and upon contact with water, the fur became weaker. Therefore, water must be the beast's weakness. He wants to fight it instead of enduring it any longer, but the villagers still seem afraid. So the main character decides he will act as bait to lure the beast so they can trap it. The villagers then disperse, but Iruru worries about his decision to be bait. He says he is an outsider, so no one will care if he dies, but Iruru tells him she considers him family and does not want him harmed. Hearing this, the main character promises he will come back because he also now considers her family. The next morning, he discusses his plan with the whole village. He wants them to follow his plan and assures them he will find a way to escape. Even though they knew that killing the forest god would curse them, he believed no one wanted to continue living in fear and one day become that beast's meal. They then entered the forest and built a trap to lure the creature in. Tioro and the main character went together to the beast's lair, drawing it out and leading it back toward the trap where many villagers lay in ambush. Along the way, the beast struck the main character, but he blocked the blow using the iron fan the village elder had given him. They then reached the trap and, timing it as the beast jumped in, cut the ropes so that the trap collapsed, submerging the beast in water. As it tried to climb out, they all lunged in together and stabbed it repeatedly. Finally, the main character delivered the finishing blow, killing the creature. The whole group then returned safely to the village, and everyone rejoiced at no longer having to live in fear. The main character returned the fan to the elder, but she chose to give it back to him instead. However, at that moment Iruru realized her sister was missing. The entire village searched for Iruru and eventually saw her returning from the forest carrying the cub of the tiger beast. The villagers worried that when it grew up it would be as ferocious as its mother, but the main character did not want any more killing and believed that at birth all creatures are pure. They decided to adopt the cub, and that night the whole village held a ceremony to bid farewell to the mother tiger. The elder now regarded the main character as part of the family and gave him a name, Hakuro. Iruru recognized it as her father's name. Iruru now became more open and no longer avoided Hakuro. After some time in the village, Hakuro taught Tioro and the villagers how to cleanse the land of bad fortune. Suddenly, they were called to gather at the elder's house because people from another village had come seeking refuge. The elder opened her heart and accepted them even though the village's food supply was not enough to support so many people. She believed war was approaching and that they would need unity to survive. That night, Iruru told Hakuro that her grandmother had been taken by some men. He immediately set out to find her, asking Iruru to stay home and watch over Iruru. Following the tracks, he was ambushed from behind by an assailant, but quickly escaped and realized he was surrounded. Just as both sides were about to fight, the elder appeared to stop them. The young man introduced himself as Oboro, and when Shyikree explained why he had been chasing them, the elder revealed that she often visited a sick girl and hadn't wanted to trouble Iruru, so she kept it a secret. She then invited Shyikree to come along, and together they followed Oboro to a camp. Oboro remained suspicious of Shyikree, but the elders spoke up for him. They then met Yuzuha, the sick girl who could not see but whose other senses were very sharp. She knew Oboro had returned, recognized the elder's visit, and sensed Shyikree following behind. After examining Yuzuha, the elder found she only had a mild fever and drew Oboro outside to give Shyikree and Yuzuha a chance to talk. Yuzuha wanted to hear Shyiree's story, but unfortunately, because of his amnesia, he could not tell her much. The two spoke pleasantly for a while until Oboro came in to have Yuzuha go to sleep, and Shyikree and the elder left. By the time they returned home, it was already morning. The elder explained to Iruru why she had gone out late at night, and Iruru felt reassured knowing Shyikree had been with her grandmother. That day, the village unexpectedly received a large supply of food, allowing them to survive for a while longer. On a rainy night not long afterward, Oboro's men arrived, urgently requesting the elder's presence. Shyikree went with her, and upon arriving they found Yuzuha in critical condition. After examining her, the elder realized Yuzuha's condition was severe and immediately called for the grinding tools to mix medicine. She used a portion of her precious medicine mixed with herbs to give to Yuzuha, stabilizing her for the time being. However, the elder warned that this condition would recur many more times until Yuzuha's death, and her supply of the rare medicine was only enough to help Yuzuha a few more times. Oboro was in anguish, not understanding why heaven had to be so cruel to his sister. Not long after, he secretly snuck into the army's camp to steal supplies, but was soon discovered. Though he managed to escape the soldiers, he was spotted by a commander. Determined, Oboro drew his sword to fight. But the commander noticed that Oboro seemed never to have lost a battle before, still carrying a reckless and arrogant attitude. The commander allowed Oboro to charge forward, then struck him down with a single blow. Oboro wanted the commander to finish him off, but the man refused, saying Oboro's life meant nothing to him. The commander then left, and the next morning, Iruru and Shyikree found Oboro unconscious in the forest. After bandaging his wounds, Oboro said he owed Shyikree a debt and promised to repay it someday. Shyikree didn't want any repayment. He only wished for Oboro to return to Yuzuha. Oboro said he owed Shyikree because he feared his reckless actions might drag Shyikree into trouble. Sure enough, not long after, government troops marched to the village, with Nuwangi among them. He announced that the previous night, someone had broken into the government storage and they suspected the village was harboring the thief. The village elder stepped forward, accusing them of going too far. The government official also owed the elder a favor for curing his illness once, but he claimed her kindness couldn't outweigh the crimes of the intruder. Iruru then threw a stone at Nuwangi, and the tiger cub bit the leg of the man's mount, causing it to panic and throw the official off. The soldiers tried to attack Iruru, but the elder stepped in to stop them and was struck down by a sword. The villagers, enraged, forced the official and his troops to retreat. The villagers then gathered at the elder's house, praying for her recovery. Teoro and his wife urged everyone to go home and let her rest, but the elder knew her time was near. She gave her final words to her two grandchildren, asking them to live in harmony and love one another, for they only had each other a sister and a brother. She then called Shyikree over, entrusting him with the care of her young grandchildren. She said she had lived long enough and was ready for her next journey, having no regrets or lingering attachments left in this life. After that, she peacefully passed away. Shyikree then went to inform Oboro of her death. Overcome with rage and sorrow, Oboro blamed himself for her death, but refused to forgive the one who had slain her. He asked Shyikree to take care of his younger siblings, then left alone. Oboro infiltrated the government residence, cutting down several guards at the gate before being overwhelmed when the official appeared with a group of archers. He was subdued and captured immediately. Meanwhile, back in the village, everyone gathered together, and Teoro declared that the elder had entrusted everything to Shyikree, making him the new village chief. Oboro's siblings begged to rescue him, saying that since the elder had once saved everyone, they couldn't stand by and do nothing. Shyikree saw that everyone understood the risks, but chose to follow them. He ordered them to arm themselves with farming tools, and together they stormed the government residence. As the new chief, Shyikree personally led the charge to raise morale. The commander from before approached Oboro again, saying he had spared his life only for Oboro to come back and throw it away. He told Oboro about the battle outside, mocking that their small band would soon be crushed. When asked why they didn't just live quietly, Oboro replied that living like that wasn't truly living, it would make them unworthy to face their loved ones. Intrigued by Obaro's conviction, the commander decided to see how his words would play out, leaving behind a sword, cutting one of Obaro's chains, and setting him free before leaving with his men. With Obaro's return, Hakuro's forces rose once more and fought their way to the official's chambers. Cornered, the official was left with nowhere to run, and Nuwangi was shocked to learn the village elder had died. He fled in panic while the soldiers charged, only to be wiped out in an instant. Hakuro then advanced and executed the government official. Afterward, he assessed the damage and wondered whether what they had done was truly right. He then asked Oboro if he was feeling better, only to punch him once, since it was Obaro's reckless actions that had pushed them onto this path. Not long after, the main army would soon arrive to crush them. Hakuro partly blamed himself too for letting things spiral out of control. Later, he met Iruru again and collapsed before her, but only to rest and think further about long-term strategies. Meanwhile, the commander returned to the Lord and reported the villagers' uprising. The Lord immediately ordered him to lead an army to crush them in retaliation for his younger brother, the one Hakuro had killed earlier. The commander had no choice but to obey. During this time, Hakuro had the villagers build defensive walls to prepare for the coming battle. Aruru and Iruru came to help, but during a break, Hakuro told both sisters they should go back soon, as this place would soon become a bloody battlefield. However, Iruru already understood this, so both sisters insisted on staying. Hakuro worried about disappointing the late elder, but truly, if the sisters left, the logistics section would be short-handed. Soon after, unexpectedly, Obaro's group arrived at the village to take shelter. Obaro said Hakuro had saved his life, so he was ready to give that life to Hakuro to use as he wished. But Hakuro didn't want a reckless man. Therefore, Obaro formally accepted Hakuro as his elder brother and swore to serve him with all his strength from then on. That night, Aruru and Iruru went to Yusua to care for her on the elder's behalf. At the same time, Obaro told Hakuro that the reason they had all come was Yusua's decision. She had firmly insisted on coming to help no matter what. This was the first time Yusua had made a selfish choice for herself, and she had prepared herself to be driven away if she became a burden. But Hakuro would never do that. At that time, he was writing letters to neighboring villages seeking their help for the uprising. He didn't care about numbers, he just needed some to respond. A few days later, the villagers began training to fight and use weapons like soldiers. One night, while walking with Iruru, Hakuro unexpectedly found Aruru sneaking near the food storehouse. She refused to let anyone inside, and when Hakuro looked, he was shocked the tiger had grown too quickly and had eaten a large amount of food. But he let it go, because the tiger seemed very fond of Aruru, and he didn't want to provoke it and risk dangerous consequences. The next day, Hakuro set off to seek support from other villages, taking Obaro and his two younger siblings with him. As they neared a new village, the four saw smoke rising ahead. They went to check and found the village completely destroyed and burned, with the people seemingly all dead. Immediately after, the commander's forces appeared. He introduced himself as Benawi and admitted he was the one who destroyed the village. Benawi said Hakuro's actions would lead to ruin, and this was his first warning. Both sides then clashed. Obaro fought Benawi's subordinates while the two younger girls lured soldiers away so Hakuro could face Benawi. But Hakuro's group was soon outnumbered. At that moment, Aruru and the tiger arrived to break the siege. The enemy knew the power of the forest god, so Benawi deliberately retreated after asking Hakuro two questions. The first was whether Hakuro truly believed his actions were just. Hakuro replied that if hell existed, that was where he belonged. The second question was only to ask Hakuro's name. As Benawi left, Hakuro realized the destroyed village had not been Benawi's doing, and their skirmish had been a test rather than a serious fight. However, the destruction of this village would serve as a warning to the others, prompting them to join Hakuro in search of hope for the future. The reason Hakuro did not see himself as righteous was because his uprising had started from the murder of a loved one. If he had endured and not rebelled, none of this would have happened. Obaro told him never to doubt his own ideals like that again. Hakuro then thanked the tiger and Aruru for coming to save them, but next time, he wanted Aruru to wait for him at home. Meanwhile, Benawi had returned to report to the Lord and learned that the village he had just set foot in had been ordered destroyed by the Lord himself as a warning to rebels, and the one who personally carried out the massacre was Nuwangi. Because of his failure, Benawi was demoted, and Nuwangi was assigned to take his position. A few days later, Nuwangi came to provoke Benawi's subordinate, Kuru, claiming that a talented man like Kuru belonged on the battlefield, not standing guard here. Nuwangi promised him a better environment, but Kuru said he would only serve and follow Benawi. At that time, Benawi was wondering what Hakuro was doing now. He then told Kuru to prepare supplies so they could head out on a mission soon. On Hakuro's side, in recent days, the number of people joining them had greatly increased. He had only one condition: they must absolutely obey his commands, and, of course, they all agreed. That day, the villagers suddenly brought in a suspicious man Eruru had caught trying to climb over the wall. Oboro thought he was a spy, but the man claimed he was just a merchant trying to sell goods to an old customer. He said he had always done business in the capital, but today the guards had changed. Hakuro told him they had just seized this place. Oboro still found him suspicious and wanted to kill him immediately, but the man said if they didn't believe he was a merchant, they could search him freely. Hakuro then wanted to see what he was selling, so the merchant unpacked his goods. Among them were many herbs, which Eruru recognized well. Besides herbs, he also carried toys and jewelry. Hakuro told him that this place would soon become a battlefield, but the merchant didn't believe it since everything around still looked peaceful. Hakuro then told Eruru to prepare some food to see the guest off. As he escorted the merchant out, the man pointed out that Hakuro was still too trusting. If he had really been a spy, Hakuro might already be dead. But when Eruru came to see him off, the merchant had no choice but to leave. Meanwhile, Banawi had been assigned to capture and guard a strategic point. At that moment, they heard someone had broken in, so they split up to pursue. Banawi and Kuru caught the intruder, but it turned out to be an innocent person trying to escape the war, so they let him go. Banawi later met with the merchant to buy information that he had recently obtained. On Hakuro's side, they identified the stronghold Banawi had just taken as an important location for recruiting more people. Just then, the fugitive arrived there to seek help from Hakuro. After learning the stronghold had been seized, Hakuro decided to take it back, setting out the next morning. After a day's march, that night Hakuro ordered the entire force to ambush outside the stronghold. When he saw the enemy troops growing tired, he gave the signal to attack and led the charge himself. His forces broke through the walls, but Banawi quickly organized a counterattack. Oboro led a unit to storm inside and create an opening for the breaching team. They successfully entered, and Hakuro unexpectedly encountered Banawi there. Oboro charged forward to fight Kuru, while Banawi rushed toward Hakuro to engage him directly. Hakuro soon noticed his forces being pushed back, and he himself was knocked to the ground. But at that critical moment, Oboro's two younger sisters arrived with reinforcements from another direction. Surrounded, Banawi ordered his troops to abandon the fort and retreat in good order. He hadn't expected Hakuro to split his forces into two fronts to attack simultaneously. Hakuro was praised for this tactic. Though it was a risky move, if reinforcements hadn't arrived in time, they would have been doomed. Hakuro was the kind of man who never fought unless he was certain of victory. When they returned with their triumph, everyone rejoiced except Eruru and Eruru, who felt a little sad, for Hakuro now belonged to everyone, not just to the two of them anymore. At this time, Banawi was being scolded by the Lord for his failure, while Nuwangi had just returned after destroying another village. Banawi was dissatisfied because the place Nuwangi attacked had nothing to do with the rebels. The Lord claimed that they needed to eliminate all potential threats that could help the rebellion grow stronger. But this disregard for the common people enraged Banawi. He decided to leave the Lord's service, only to be thrown into prison. After that, Hakuoro continuously led his army into battles and achieved victories across the eastern regions surrounding their base. Although they had gained more allies, Oboro was still displeased, as these new allies were merely opportunists who followed whoever held power once the Lord, and now them. Tioro, however, didn't care, saying that having more troops was all that mattered. That night, Eruru found that Hakuoro was still awake and came to ask him for a favor to spend some time visiting Yuzua. Hakuoro then went to see Yuzua, and as the two talked and listened to the sounds of the night sky, Oboro suddenly arrived to report that something had happened. Nuwangi was once again leading troops to attack another village. He had ordered his soldiers to kill all survivors to prevent any future retaliation. Though the soldiers hesitated, just as they were about to strike, Hakuoro's army arrived to stop them. They quickly suppressed Nuwangi's troops, forcing them to retreat. Soon after, another group of soldiers arranged by Hakuoro charged in from behind, surrounding Nuwangi's forces. His men fled, abandoning him behind. He was swiftly captured by the villagers and brought back to the city for judgment. Later, Eruru went to meet Hakuoro and saw Nuwangi again. Everyone decided to let Eruru determine Nuwangi's fate, whether he should be executed or imprisoned, but she chose to release him. No one could go back on their word, so they followed her decision and let him go. Afterward, Hakuoro's army continued to advance steadily, gradually sweeping away and driving back all of the Lord's forces. Eventually, they surrounded the capital, where the final battle would take place. On the day of the march, the entire army gathered around the Lord's capital. When the Lord heard that the enemy had arrived, he remained calm, saying everything should be left to Nuwangi. However, since Nwangi had disappeared for several days, he had no choice but to let his soldiers handle it themselves. The troops were hastily deployed throughout the city, and this poorly organized defense was quickly seen through by Hakuoro, who prepared a counter-strategy. He then ordered the vanguard to charge forward and clear the path. The army advanced, crossing the moat and setting up ladders to climb the walls. Immediately afterward, another squad rushed to break open the gate. Once the gate opened, Hakuoro commanded the entire army to storm in. His forces began to overpower and dominate the enemy soldiers. During the chaos, Kuru took the opportunity to rescue Banawi. However, instead of fleeing, Banawi decided to fight this battle as a commander. When Hakuoro and Oboro stormed in, they encountered Banawi and Kuru. Oboro charged forward, but Banawi blocked his attack and noticed how much Oboro had improved. As enemy soldiers began to arrive, Oboro left to deal with them. Banawi and Hakuoro then briefly clashed before Hakuoro's army gradually pushed deeper into the city. Kuru then stepped in to cover Banawi, allowing him to leave first. Banawi rushed to the Lord's chamber and informed him that he had lost the battle. After a moment of panic, the Lord demanded Banawi to help him escape, but Banawi said that only those who could flee now. If the Lord didn't want to be executed by the people, Banawi was willing to send him ahead right this moment. Meanwhile, Oboro quickly rushed in and fought in Hakuoro's stead. At that moment, Banawi decided to take the Lord's life. Without saying a word, he struck him down. When Hakuoro arrived, the Lord was already dead. Banawi told Hakuoro to take care of the country from now on and expressed his wish to die alongside the Lord. However, Hakuoro stopped him, saying that since the nation had changed hands, Banawi's duty was not yet over. Banawi then went outside with Hakuoro and announced that the Lord was dead. With no reason left to fight, the remaining soldiers laid down their weapons. Thus, both sides reconciled, sitting together to rest and share a meal. Banawi also began to develop a more favorable view of Hakuoro. Meanwhile, at the church, they had received news that another nation had been defeated and overthrown. When the priest heard the name of the new country, he was greatly surprised it was the same as the name of the village elder woman. At that moment, the saint arrived to inform the priest that she would personally visit this newly founded country. The priest was worried that the land might still be unstable after the war, but since the saint had already made up her mind, he had no choice but to agree. A few days later, Hakuoro and his people decided to remain in the capital, while Teoro and the villagers chose to return to their homeland, believing that the place where they were born would also be where they died. A few days after that, Hakuoro began to promote the reconstruction of the capital. Nearby tribes soon came to pay respects to him. Shortly afterward, Aruru discovered the arrival of an envoy. According to Banawi, they were emissaries from a high-ranking tribe, a group comparable in scale to a church who sought to establish ties with every nation. Although they rarely interfered in wars, they would intervene if deemed necessary. The saint and her attendants then came to meet Hakuoro. The saint introduced herself as Yuritori, and the man beside her as Munto. When they moved to Hakuoro's private chamber for further conversation, Iruru brought in tea to serve the guests. Munto initially thought it was a common, low-quality tea and assumed Hakuoro was being disrespectful, but upon tasting it and finding it delicious, he immediately took back his words. Yuritori requested that Hakuoro personally guide her around the city under reconstruction. While Hakuoro was willing, Banawi insisted that he stay in the residence to handle administrative work, so Iruru would serve as their guide instead. Yuritori observed that this land had just emerged from tyranny, and the people were now finally able to live in peace and rebuild their lives. Soon after, a few children passed by and plucked feathers from Munto's wings before running off. Meanwhile, Hakuoro was still buried in his tiresome pile of paperwork. That night, Yuritori visited Iruru's room and, upon realizing that Iruru was a physician, shared that she herself had once wanted to study medicine to save lives. However, upon understanding her own responsibilities, she had been forced to give up that dream. Iruru, on the other hand, explained that she didn't become a healer purely to save others. Her grandmother had once been a beloved village doctor, and Iruru wished to be like her. Around the same time, Hakuoro went out to the lakeside for some fresh air, where he saw a girl with black wings playing by the water. When he looked away for a moment, she suddenly disappeared. Returning to his room, Hakuoro found that the same girl was lying asleep on his bed. Startled upon awakening and seeing him, she used an invisibility spell to hide. But since the spell only worked briefly, she was discovered again. As she fled, she encountered Aruru's tiger and panicked, running back to hide inside a basket. The tiger approached and knocked the basket over, but Aruru arrived, calling her tiger back and also saying she wanted to sleep with Hakuoro. Yuritori soon appeared and found the black-winged girl, who turned out to be her younger sister, Kamyu. Worried that her sister had caused trouble, Yuritori offered to take responsibility. But Hakuoro held no grudge and even welcomed Kamiyu to stay as a guest. The next day, Hakuoro's work piled up even more. Oboro and Kiryu came to argue over how the military should be reorganized, while Kamiyu went looking for Aruru, hoping to become friends with her. However, Aruru kept running away from Kamiyu. Still, Kamiyu refused to give up and continued to follow her. She tried to be kind and friendly, yet Aruru continued to avoid her. When Kamiyu met Hakuoro again, she asked him how to make friends with Aruru. He gave her advice and asked her not to tell anyone that he was sneaking away from work to relax. Meanwhile, Banawi returned to the office and discovered that Hakuoro had slipped out. Kamiyu then brought beeswax and honey to offer to Aruru. Aruru wanted Kamiyu to eat with her. Though Kamiyu was initially nervous, after tasting how good it was, she finally succeeded in befriending Aruru and also Yuzua. Around that time, Banawi met Oboro and asked about Hakuoro, but Oboro had no idea. Just then, Munto crawled out from hiding. He had been tied up by Kamiyu. He asked the two of them if they had seen his princess, but Banawi noticed Kamiyu, Aruru, and Yuzua all playing together outside with the tiger. The three of them spent the entire day happily playing together before returning to sleep in the same room that night. At that time, Yuritori came to see Aruru and told her that she had known of Aruru's grandmother. Her grandmother was a legendary figure, someone whom no healer in the field did not know. Though death is said to return all living beings to the gods, it still remains a sorrowful thing. Aruru felt sad as she spoke of her grandmother, but she knew she could not remain attached to that sorrow forever, for her grandmother surely would not have wanted her to. The next day, when Hakuoro went to feed the tiger, he found the three girls all sleeping on top of it. He silently hoped that these peaceful days could last forever. After several days, Yuritori and her entourage departed, satisfied that life in this land had changed for the better. Kamiyu was reluctant to leave but promised that she would return soon to visit Aruru and Yuzua. In the following days, another delegation arrived to meet Hakuoro. Unlike the friendly envoys from the church, these ones carried an imperial decree from the lord of the Shyikree region, King Niwo, demanding that the land Hakuoro had conquered be placed under their jurisdiction. It was clear that their intent was to annex the territory, prompting Oboro to immediately reach for his weapon, but Hakuoro stopped him. Remaining composed and polite, he expressed apparent willingness to submit while inviting the envoys to stay for a few days while he and his council discussed the matter. A few days later, they escorted the Shyikree delegation out of the capital. Oboro was furious at their arrogance, but Banawi explained that Shyikree was a powerful nation, its military and territory both at least 10 times greater than their own. However, Hakuoro showed no hesitation. He instructed Banawi to begin fortifying the border defenses. When the delegation returned and reported to Niue, they mocked Hakuoro as a cowardly lord too afraid to defy them, one who even hosted a banquet for their emissaries. Yet Niue saw through Hakuoro's scheme immediately. He realized that Hakuoro merely regarded them as a troop of performing monkeys, and he had no use for such a man. He ordered his forces to prepare for battle. That very night, Shikree's army launched their first attack. Kiryu hurried back to deliver the report. The fortress of Upak had been attacked and fallen. A war council was quickly convened. Hakuoro commanded the border troops stationed at Kinohan and Shishimaru to regroup at Haohoro Fortress under Banawe's leadership. His order was simple: hold out for 3 days to give Hakuoro time to prepare. As for Oboro, Hakuoro entrusted him with a confidential mission. That afternoon, Hakuoro assigned several tasks to the merchant before sending him off. Afterward, Iruru came to see him. She knew they were preparing for war and had overheard that Hakuoro was working on a forbidden medicine. She told him that her grandmother had once forbidden the creation of that drug because it could bring catastrophe. However, Hakuoro asked her to trust him and wait for his plan to unfold. The next day, Shikree's army reached one of the strongholds, but Hakuoro's troops had long since withdrawn. At Haohoro, Banawi ordered his men to gather bows, arrows, and large stones onto the fortress walls. Not long after, Hakuoro began marching to the battlefield, this time forbidding Aruru from coming along. That night, Shikree's army arrived and surrounded Banawi's fortress. They began their assault, but Banawi commanded his men to fire volleys of arrows and drop heavy stones, preventing any enemy soldier from scaling the walls. As for Oboro, under Haruko's orders, he infiltrated the enemy camp and placed something inside their food storage. Hakiro observed from a distance, and at that moment, he noticed that Iruru had followed him. She said she had a bad feeling and asked him directly what his true intentions were. He explained that humans need food and water to survive, and without them, they cannot live. The forbidden thing he mentioned referred to explosives. Just as he finished speaking, the enemy's food storage exploded. That was the answer to Iruru's question about what the forbidden thing was. Hakuoro had used a mysterious substance, combining it with another to create a terrifying destructive power. A massive flame erupted from the warehouse, a cruel but effective tactic. Hakuoro admitted that he did not want the sisters to witness such a sight, but circumstances did not allow otherwise. When the enemy tried to save their supplies, Hakuoro's forces launched an ambush and won a complete victory. However, what Hakuoro did not expect was that Neil himself would appear on the battlefield. Neil completely overpowered Hakuoro, but the raging flames interrupted their fight. Neil said this was merely a greeting and that they would meet again, then withdrew. Meanwhile, Banawi's unit also retreated after receiving the signal. On a stormy day, Oboro and Kiro were sent to the coast to investigate a report of a shipwreck there. However, when they arrived, they found numerous slain soldiers, and at the center of them was a woman with blood-stained arms. She soon lost consciousness, and both men brought her back. Hakuoro learned that the wrecked ship was the Natonku, which came from a southern land of the same name. According to Banawi, it was a slave ship, and the woman they rescued was one of its captives. Oboro imprisoned her, believing it abnormal for one person to have killed an entire battalion alone. However, the woman had long since escaped and appeared before Hakuoro. She introduced herself as Karura, and instead of treating her with hostility like Oboro and Kiro, Hakuoro invited her to stay and asked Iruru to tend to her wounds, saying they would decide what to do with her later. After the meeting, Banawi asked whether Hakuoro intended to keep Karura. He feared that Natunku would use her as a pretext to attack, but Hakuoro was more concerned about Shyikree at the moment. Not long after, Iruru and Oboro quarreled again. She wanted to grant Karura freedom, while he suspected her of being a spy. After hearing them argue, Hakuoro agreed to release Karura, but only within the confines of the city. Banawi and Oboro thought he was being too lenient with Iruru. Later, Karura met Iruru, who was curious about her bracelet. Instead of revealing it as a slave's shackle, Karura said it was merely jewelry. She even made Iruru a flower bracelet, delighting the little girl. Iruru offered to prepare a bed for Karura, but she refused, saying she was used to sleeping in cells. Her only request was for wine, which she drank in great amounts. In the following days, Karura often strolled around the city, while Kiro grew bored because the soldiers weren't strong enough to be his opponents. When he saw Karura, he challenged her to a fight, but she ignored him. Meanwhile, inside the residence, Yutori came to see Hakuoro and offered to become his Yomoro. At that moment, Iruru also led Karura into the meeting, and upon seeing each other, Karura and Yutori reacted as though they were old friends reunited. The two then sat down and drank together. Hakuoro discussed with everyone whether Karura should join the army. He believed that since Shyikree was eyeing them, they needed to strengthen their forces. The Yomoro would handle diplomacy, and aside from Oboro, everyone agreed to accept Karura. She then appeared and volunteered herself, suggesting that if they wanted to test her strength, they could fight her. Oboro and Kiro eagerly volunteered, but Banawi said he would take the match instead. The two went outside to duel, and once the battle began, Karura displayed overwhelming power. Her speed and strength were exceptional. However, none of her swords could withstand her strength and broke every time they clashed with Banawi's weapon. By the third sword, which also shattered, the match was called off. Not long after, a merchant arrived with a gigantic weapon Karura had ordered. It was extremely heavy, and only she could lift it. She swung it once and shattered an enormous boulder. After that, no one had anything left to complain about her. At that same time, Yutori had returned after visiting other lords. She brought back information that they were willing to attend the ceremony to sign a long-term alliance agreement. To guard against Niwi, they needed the support of surrounding nations. With their help, Shyikree would not dare to make any reckless moves for the time being, giving them more time to prepare. Not long after, the lords all arrived. Yutori read the oath before everyone, after which they each stepped forward to seal the agreement. Just then, a commotion broke out outside. It was Uncle Teoro rushing in. He said that their village had been attacked and the enemy forces were flooding into the city. Hakuoro suspected Shyikree, but the uncle wasn't sure. Hakuoro immediately ordered everyone to prepare. He asked about the villagers, and Teoro said they had already evacuated, urging him to hurry. Everyone then set out for battle, while Uncle Teoro went inside to rest, exhausted. Outside, Hakuoro heard loud noises. He ordered the gates opened, allowing the enemy to pour in. As they advanced, wooden stakes hidden beneath the ground rose up, tripping the soldiers and making them fall forward. Oboro's two younger siblings commanded the archers to shoot them down one by one. Meanwhile, inside, blood began to flow from Teoro's body. He didn't seem to have much time left. At that moment, his wife and the villagers arrived to take him away. Seeing them, he smiled faintly and entrusted everything to Hakuoro. Outside, Hakuoro was stunned to see the enemies charging forward like madmen, throwing their lives away without hesitation. When only the last soldier remained, he smiled and said that it wasn't over yet. Their killing had no purpose, just for amusement. That evening, everyone gathered around Teuro's body. Eruru, unaware of his death, kept trying to wake him up. Then Kuro returned from scouting the village and reported that Eruru's entire village had been slaughtered. Both Eruru and Aruru couldn't accept it. The younger sister struggled violently, unable to face the truth, forcing Eruru to sedate her. Hakuoro did the same for Eruru to help her rest. Later, he gathered everyone for a meeting. From their clothing, Binawi identified the attackers as warriors from Kokakeka. Oboro wanted to strike back immediately, but Hakuoro told him to calm down. There wasn't enough evidence yet, and they needed to investigate further. That night, while he was deep in thought, Karara came to invite him for a drink. Hakuoro still couldn't understand why those soldiers never retreated and simply rushed to die. Karara gently explained that they were already dead. They had accepted death from the start, so they feared nothing. What Hakuoro should be asking himself, she said, was what he had done to make them so willing to die to kill him. Naturally, he had no answer, as he had lost all his memories. He didn't even know who he truly was. The next day, Yutori reported that the attack from the previous night had made the lords fearful, causing them all to withdraw from the alliance. Hakuoro suspected that everything had been orchestrated from the beginning. Then news arrived from the envoy Hakuoro had sent to Kokakeka. They had all been slaughtered, leaving only one survivor to deliver the message before dying as well. This incident pushed Hakuoro to his limit, and he ordered the army to prepare. The campaign began soon after, with the entire army mobilized. However, during the march, they were ambushed and surrounded by Kokakeka forces on all sides. Binawi immediately commanded a defensive formation. Yet from the enemy commander's words, Hakuoro sensed something was wrong. They called him a demon and a traitor. A fierce battle broke out between both sides, but with Karara's arrival and her terrifying great blade, the Kokakeka soldiers faltered. One of their generals, Tauko, recognized Karara's overwhelming strength and ordered a retreat. Even after their withdrawal, Hakuoro couldn't shake his doubts about whether their words were true. Later, upon returning, everyone advised Hakuoro to rest. Everyone except him had their own worries on their minds. While he drifted into a dream, dark shadows surrounded him, and that same general appeared again, calling him a demon, a treacherous brother-in-law. Just as the man swung his weapon toward him, Hakuoro woke up. Eruru stayed by his side to care for him. Though he was still troubled about his true identity, she reassured him that everything would be fine because now he was the lord of everyone. Meanwhile, Oboro, still burning with the desire to avenge Eruru's village, secretly led his troops to track the Kuka army. They soon encountered Tauko. Since there was only one enemy, Oboro said he would handle it himself. However, the opponent was far too strong and utterly overwhelmed him. Tauko did not finish him off. Instead, she said something about being on the side of justice, and that those who followed the demon Hakuoro would never be able to touch her before leaving. Returning injured and humiliated, Oboro was mocked by Kuro. However, Kuro also reported that he had found the enemy's camp. Yet by the time they got there, the enemy had already withdrawn. Binawi explained that the Kuka army excelled in mobility, using fast and decisive tactics. The second major concern was Tauko. She belonged to the Even Kiriga tribe, a small ethnic group in the Central Plains, known for their legendary swordsmen who would sacrifice their lives to protect what they believed was justice. This seemed somehow related to Hakuoro's lost memories. With Tauko among the enemy, victory would be difficult. When Eruru brought tea, everyone sat together for a moment before returning to the war council. Kuka was an open grassland region, but there was a ravine dividing the land into two parts. Crossing it would take considerable time. According to intelligence, the enemy always disappeared around that point, suggesting there might be a hidden bridge. While everyone strained their eyes searching, Eruru pointed to its location. It turned out she and Kamiyu had secretly followed the enemy's trail. This made everyone worried, but Eruru apologized and gave Hakuoro a flower, so no one scolded her. Once the bridge's location was confirmed, they began marching the next day. They found it quickly thanks to Eruru and the tiger. However, Tauko had already anticipated this and set up an ambush. Before the battle began, she declared that anyone serving the demon was a beast, enraging Oboro and Kuro, who charged forward and annihilated the Kuka soldiers until only Tauko remained. Hakuoro stepped up and asked why she called him a demon, but she ignored the question, saying only that he had slaughtered countless lives, an unforgivable sin. When she charged, Korua stepped out to face her. Wielding her massive blade, Korua effortlessly pushed Tauko back to the middle of the bridge, then struck a powerful blow that shattered it. With the battle over, everyone returned. Yet that night, Hakuoro was still haunted by Tauko's words. Eruru came to him. They shared drinks and spoke. Hakuoro feared that perhaps he truly was the murderer who killed his own wife and child, that maybe what Tauko said was true. But Iruru reassured him she believed in his innocence, and no matter what, she would stand by him. Meanwhile, the people had begun to feel uneasy, thinking that since Tauko and the Kuka warriors fought for justice, perhaps Hakuoro truly was a demon. He continued managing political affairs and listening to Benawi's military reports, while Iruru grew increasingly worried as she saw him drink more each day. He was afraid of himself, afraid of who he really was. His hands trembled uncontrollably, but a gentle embrace from Iruru behind him soothed his fears. She told him she would always believe in him, that no matter who he was, he would always be Hakuoro. The next day, Hakuoro set aside his duties to spend time with Iruru and Iruru. He asked why she always supported him so much, and she replied that it was because they were family. At that moment, the tiger and Iruru playfully pounced on Hakuoro, and he joined their laughter. Seeing his bright smile, Iruru finally felt at ease. But the peace did not last long. News arrived that the Kuka army was preparing to attack. Hakuoro immediately returned to command and ordered everyone to prepare. This would be the final battle. However, he did not summon all the troops to the front. He ordered Iruru and the tiger to remain behind to guard the fortress, while the rest marched with him. Soon after, both sides met on the battlefield. Without hesitation, Hakuoro gave the signal to attack, and the enemy, unafraid, charged forward as well. Both sides quickly clashed. Tauko and the general charged into Hakuoro's forces in search of him to take revenge. Once they spotted him, both rushed forward, but Kuro swiftly intercepted Tauko. He had waited a long time for this day. Meanwhile, the general continued to charge straight toward Hakuoro. Seeing this, Hakuoro withdrew to lure him away. Tauko realized it was a trap and tried to follow, but Karada and Oboro blocked her path. This was Benawi's plan to give Hakuoro and the general a chance to talk privately. Surrounded, Tauko was forced into a defensive stance. However, she was not the type to give up easily. Taking advantage of Oboro's momentary carelessness, she suddenly accelerated and escaped. When Karo struck, Tauko quickly leapt high into the air to dodge. After that, they decided to let her go. Meanwhile, Hakuoro was trying to talk to the general about his identity, but the man refused to listen and kept attacking. This forced Hakuoro to knock him off his mount to make him talk. Upon learning that Hakuoro remembered nothing, the general burst into laughter, saying that even if he had forgotten, he could never erase his sins. His blood-stained hands were proof of them. A man who murdered his wife and child, what else could he be but a killer, he said. Hakuoro looked at his own hands as strange memories began to surge in his mind. A dark aura then enveloped his body, terrifying the general. But before Hakuoro could do anything, the general was assassinated by Niwa. The true mastermind behind everything was now obvious. After sowing more hatred within Hakuoro, Niwa left. Tauko arrived just in time to witness everything, realizing she had been manipulated like a puppet all along. After the battle, everyone returned. Though technically a victory, no one felt happy. Meanwhile, Niwa's army was advancing to attack them. Throughout the following battles, the Shyikree forces continuously raided and slaughtered villages within Hakuoro's territory, and it was always Oboro who led troops to intercept them. Benawi reported that although they had won many skirmishes, the Shyikree army had now set up camp right on the border, and dozens of villages had already been destroyed. Furious, Oboro loudly insisted that they should invade Shyikree to avenge the devastated villages and the countless innocent lives lost. He believed this was the only way to repay the enemy's cruelty 100-fold. However, Hakuoro remained calm and cautious, making a completely opposite decision to focus solely on defense, strengthening patrols along the border. This sparked intense opposition from Oboro, who could not understand why Hakuoro would choose what seemed like such a cowardly path. But Hakuoro's decision was final and unchangeable. At that moment, Yutori interrupted, bringing Tauko with her. Tauko had prepared herself for execution, believing her death might atone for the sins she had unknowingly caused, even if it had all been a tragic misunderstanding. Yet Hakuoro offered her a different way to atone. Instead of taking her life, he returned to her a precious belonging and entrusted her with a mission to return the body of King Orikaken, the ruler she once served, to his homeland. Hakuoro explained that King Orikaken was not an enemy, but merely an unfortunate victim deceived by a wicked mastermind, who was the true source of all evil. Hakuoro's compassion deeply moved Tauko, making her feel she owed him a great debt of gratitude. But just as their conversation ended, an urgent message arrived. The Shyikree army had once again crossed the border to continue their invasion. Hakuoro and his commanders, including Oboro and Kuro, immediately set out for battle, leaving Tauko behind to carry out her mission. On the front lines, the arrogant Shyikree forces advanced toward a village they intended to burn to the ground, unaware they were walking straight into a trap. The Tuscaroo troops, under Obero's command, had lain in ambush and launched a coordinated attack, with the blue and red units firing volleys of arrows in unison, creating a deadly rain of death. Right after repelling that attack, another report arrived, this time from the western frontier. Shyikree was launching a large-scale pincer assault. On the western front, the Tuscaroo forces were once again outnumbered, but they witnessed the terrifying power of a lone warrior, Karua, who single-handedly sowed panic among the Shyikree troops and forced them to retreat. At the enemy base, the true mastermind Niue met a samurai commander from Kukakeka who wanted to join his ranks. Instead of welcoming him, Niue ordered the man taken to a secret place where a scientist was conducting gruesome experiments, harvesting materials from prisoners. Niue grew impatient and expressed a particular fascination with Hakuro, seemingly waiting to see Hakuro's true form. The war dragged on, Shyikree attacks increased, and the conflict turned into a calculated war of attrition. Hakuro recognized the enemy's strategy, repeated small engagements intended to wear down Tuscaroo's physical strength and morale, baiting them into a desperate all-out attack. Again, Obero demanded a counterattack, but Hakuro firmly refused, explaining that with an enemy force 10 times larger, a head-on clash would be suicide. He revealed there was only one way to win, a secret plan he could not yet disclose for fear the enemy would learn it, and asked everyone to trust him. After the council, Hakuro confided in Iruru about the burdens and doubts crushing him. He only wanted to protect those he loved, yet the endless war pushed the nation toward an even greater catastrophe. He felt lost and didn't know where he was heading. Iruru steadied him with absolute faith, promising to believe in him no matter what. Her words became a vast well of mental strength for Hakuro. On the battlefield, Hakuro's clever tactics continued to pay off. They lured enemy troops into marshland they had prepared, inflicting heavy losses. Still, each victory felt incomplete. Though they won battles, they were losing the war. Exhaustion and attrition showed on every soldier's face. Niue, by contrast, was delighted, convinced Hakuro was cornering himself, and ordered relentless attacks to grind them down. The horrors of war showed plainly among the Tuscaroo troops: exhaustion, mounting casualties, dwindling medicine. Even Aruru collapsed from fatigue. Finally, the decisive moment came. Niue ordered a full-scale assault with a single command: burn everything and kill everyone. Facing this, Hakuro revealed his plan, a bold, risky gambit to lure the entire Shyikree army into Tuscaroo territory, empty their country completely, then dispatch an elite Tuscaroo force to strike the Shyikree castle and seize Niue's head. A miscalculation occurred when enemy units advanced at uneven speeds, disrupting the original plan, but Hakuro adapted immediately. He sent Banawi with cavalry around the west to cut enemy supply lines, while he, Obero, Kiryu, and Karuta confronted the forces pouring across the border. He even mobilized wounded men who could still move for this life-or-death battle. The fighting was brutal, and Hakuro himself was wounded in combat, but at the very moment he fell into peril, Toko suddenly appeared. She had returned to repay her debt to Hakuoro, following the sacred Evankulga custom of repaying honor with honor. Her arrival marked a turning point in the war. She exposed Niue as the deceiver who had manipulated King Orikeken, shaking the morale of a portion of the enemy army. Amid the chaos of battle, a personal tragedy struck when Iruru tried to save a dying mother and her child. But the woman did not survive, leaving behind a heart-wrenching reminder of the cruel price of war. After the battle, the Shyikree forces temporarily retreated, but Tuscaroo had suffered devastating losses. Half of Obero's unit was annihilated, and countless villages lay in ashes. Knowing the enemy would soon return with full strength, Hakuoro realized there was no choice but to carry out his original plan to the end. He decided to personally lead an elite strike force, Kaira and Tauko, his two mightiest warriors, on a march toward the enemy's castle, while Banawi, Obero, and Kiryu stayed behind to command the main defensive line. It would be a race against time, the final gamble, with the fate of an entire nation resting on whether Hakuoro could slay Niue before everyone was slaughtered. Once the fallen had been buried, Hakuoro and his small but resolute force set out on what was nearly a suicidal mission to end this blood-soaked nightmare. On the march, Banawi and his comrades reached the national border, but a thick fog blanketed the land, making it impossible to pinpoint the enemy's location. However, Aruru, with her keen senses, felt their presence and warned that they were very close. As the mist slowly cleared, a breathtaking sight emerged: an immense Shyikree army, at least 50,000 strong, stretching to the horizon and facing Banawi's forces. Carrying the critical role of holding the line and drawing the enemy's attention, Banawi understood perfectly what was at stake. His duty was to hold at all costs, to buy time, and never to charge recklessly forward, for doing so would mean instant annihilation. Meanwhile, deep within Shyikree territory, Hakuoro, accompanied by Iruru, Karuta, and Tauko, began their infiltration of the enemy castle. With Tauko leading the way, she swiftly and silently dispatched the guards, clearing the path for the team. Soon after, Karuha joined the fray, displaying her overwhelming might. As they advanced further inside, a trio of enemy generals appeared, 3 men who called themselves brothers, declaring they would take Hakuwaro's head and begin a feast of carnage. Karuha chose to stay behind to face all 3 alone, urging Hakuwaro and the others to move on, promising she would deal with these insects herself, leaving Hakuwaro only with an apology for burdening her with this task. However, it seemed 2 of the brothers decided to pursue Hakuwaro's group, leaving only Amuro to fight Karuha, but she swiftly intercepted them, refusing to let anyone pass. They boasted that their true strength only emerged when the 3 fought together, yet even as they faced Karuha head-on, they remained arrogantly confident. Facing 2 of them at once, Karuha displayed astonishing composure and cunning. When they warned her that she could not win by running, she turned their words into a weapon pretending to flee. She deceived one into lowering his guard, then unleashed a devastating strike with all her strength focused on a single target, killing him instantly. The remaining 2, stunned by her power, could only call her a monster before being consumed by Karuha's fury. Meanwhile, Hakuwaro and Iruru finally reached the throne chamber, but what awaited them there was far from an ordinary battle. Niwa, the mastermind behind everything, appeared with a twisted grin and unleashed his pets, the finest warriors from the nations he had conquered, now transformed into soulless monsters driven only by bloodlust and obedience. Niwa explained that he had merely awakened the beastly blood within them, yet none of them could truly satisfy him. He believed they were merely tools to awaken the true beast. The one he meant was Hakuwaro himself. At that moment, Karuha, having finished off her own enemies, arrived just in time. She and the others charged into battle against the horde of monsters, forming a wall of steel to shield Hakuwaro. Karuha roared that if cutting them didn't work, they should just tear them apart, urging Hakuwaro to move forward and end Niwa once and for all. Iruru, filled with fierce determination, declared that she would go with Hakuwaro. She wanted to witness the path he chose with her own eyes. With no other choice left, Hakuwaro faced Niwa directly, the latter waiting for him with deranged delight. Niwa mockingly called Hakuwaro his beloved beast, and when Hakuwaro offered him a chance to surrender in exchange for his life, Niwa burst into maniacal laughter. To him, war was like a grand hunt. One must carefully prepare the trap, wait for the prey, and in the end, there were only 2 choices: eat or be eaten. Then, to heighten the drama of his own twisted play, Niwa committed an act of unimaginable madness and cruelty. He ordered the burning of his own nation, setting the capital of Shyikree ablaze. Hakuwaro and Iruru could only watch in horror as the city turned into a sea of flames, hearing the screams of innocent civilians being burned alive. In his frenzy, Niwa declared that everyone would believe it was Hakuwaro who had done this, that he was the monster who had burned countless innocents to ash. This drove Hakuwaro into a rage. He roared that he would never forgive Niwa. But Niwa only grew more exhilarated, reveling in Hakuwaro's fury and hatred. Then he revealed an even darker truth. Everything that had happened Orikaken, the burning capital, all the deaths in the war were sacrifices to feed the beast within Hakuwaro. He accused Hakuwaro of being a bringer of calamity, saying that if Hakuwaro wanted to curse someone, he should curse himself. Pushed to the brink by Niwa's cruelty and accusations, the fury inside Hakuwaro finally erupted. A vast, primal, and terrifying power awoke within him, transforming him into something entirely different, a beast, just as Niwa had desired. His eyes blazed with an otherworldly light, his body wrapped in violent energy. Iruru could only retreat in terror, while Niwa laughed with ecstatic delight, shouting that he had waited so long for this moment. Hakuwaro roared that he would destroy Niwa, and the 2 clashed in a final battle atop the burning castle. Niwa's sword danced wildly, his excitement peaking as he called Hakuwaro his ultimate prey, savoring the sensation of fire scorching his skin. But Hakuwaro, fueled by the anguish and hatred of thousands of lives destroyed by Niwa's madness, unleashed a cataclysmic force. He roared, demanding to know if Niwa was satisfied, if this was truly the ending he sought after sacrificing so many. With a final, devastating strike, Hakuwaro completely overpowered and slew Niwa. In his last moments, Niwa seemed almost content, admitting that his judgment had been correct, that Hakuwaro truly was the supreme beast. He invited Hakuwaro to devour him, fulfilling the law of existence he so fervently believed in: eat or be eaten. And then, Hakuwaro fully transformed into a monstrous creature, tearing Niwa into 100 pieces. When he finally regained consciousness and returned to human form, everything had already ended. Beneath the castle, Karuha and Tauko had finished clearing out the last of the monsters. They could only look up at the overwhelming destruction the battle had left behind. Meanwhile, at the borders, Binawe and his troops watched as the castle collapsed into a sea of flames. They knew their commander had achieved victory, but at an immeasurable cost. The Feast of Blood had ended, yet the scars it left would never fade. Less than a month after the war with Shyikree ended, recovery efforts progressed rapidly, and the fields once ravaged by war had astonishingly transformed before their eyes, a testament to the unyielding will to survive of humankind. During an inspection trip, Hakuoro walked alongside his companions, and the townsfolk, especially the children, recognized him and joyfully welcomed him. They even promised that one day they would grow strong enough to fight beside him. However, Iruru gently told them that by the time they grew up, there would be no more wars, so they wouldn't need to fight. Hakuoro agreed, advising them instead to help their parents so life could return to normal sooner. Later, in a council meeting, post-war issues were discussed. For Kukakeka, Tuscaruu would send a special envoy to assist in re-establishing their government, a decision that Tauko, the representative of Kukakeka, gratefully accepted. However, the situation in Shyikree was far more complicated, as their capital had been completely burned down and only about 10% of the population remained, making reconstruction extremely difficult. Although the original plan was to annex the territory into Tuscaruu, Hakuoro made the decision to abandon the old capital. He believed that the survivors should move to a new land, free from the vile past under Niwa's reign. Even so, the weight of war and the burden of life and death decisions still weighed heavily on Hakuoro's mind, leaving him exhausted. Seeing this, Iruru offered to massage his shoulders. In those quiet moments, Niwa's final words echoed once again in his mind that he was a beast bringing calamity, that as long as he existed, war would never end, and he hallucinated his hands drenched in blood. Meanwhile, life in the castle continued in its own rhythm. Though Tauko had been given a comfortable room, she remained exceedingly formal and insisted on guarding Hakuoro despite his refusal. At the same time, Oboro and Kuru were caught red-handed by Iruru while trying to steal snacks to eat with their sake, lightening the mood with laughter. Soon after, everyone's attention turned to the training yard, where Oboro was having a sparring match with Benawi. Oboro showcased remarkable improvement with swift and powerful attacks, but Benawi, calm and strategic as ever, easily deflected them, always staying one step ahead. In the end, Benawi cleverly lured Oboro into a trap and claimed victory. He then offered valuable advice to always plan 2 or 3 steps ahead and never underestimate the opponent. Despite his loss, Oboro's progress was recognized by Benawi, and to celebrate, everyone held a feast in broad daylight. Laughter and cheerful voices returned once more, filling Hakuoro and Iruru's hearts with warmth. Part 1 ends here. Farewell.